Good afternoon and welcome to Right Now. I am Chris Reddy. This is 95.3 FM WILI 1400 AM. If you are interested in listening to any of our previous shows, you can listen to them on WILI.com. You can scroll to the podcast menu, scroll all the way down. You can find Right Now, and you can listen to any of our previous episodes there. You can also find us on YouTube, and you can see the live in-studio recording of our radio broadcast at any time that you would like. We're going to start off today's February 19th episode following up with a little bit of information about something that I discussed on Monday on Mike DeSaunier's Unfiltered. I was a guest there. Today I am in studio by myself with just my producer, Matt, helping me out today. Thank you for being here. As always, Matt, I appreciate that. If anybody would like to call in to the studio and have any commentary on this or previous episodes or talk about anything, the number for WILI is going to be 860-456-1400. I would also like to take a moment and thank one of our sponsors, Wyndham Industries, Building Strong Foundations for Tomorrow. Thank you very much for supporting our broadcast information. One thing that we discussed on Monday was the issues with the Yantic Fire Department and their problems with the Norwich Fire Department. Yantic Fire Department, if you are aware, a volunteer service that has been incorporated since 1847, providing first response, fire and EMS to sections of Norwich. Last week, they were provided with a contract that they were expected to sign, consolidating not only the unified command structure and the tactical command and budgeting oversight to all fall underneath the City of Norwich Fire Department. We talked about this on Mike DeSaunier's show on Monday, and I wanted to provide a little bit more information and also a upcoming event related to this, which appeared on Facebook this morning. It is a community protest demanding accountability for what has been going on with the Norwich Fire Department and the Yantic Fire Department. This is going to take place on February 28th, 2026. This will be from 10 a.m. until 12 p.m. The location is going to be 137 Norwich Road in the town of Taftville. They're asking for you to ask for transparency and accountability in the governorship of the fire department, and they want you to bring signs, bring your voice, bring a friend, try and get as much information out there as possible to support our local fire departments. This is coming from a place of personal perspective for me, having been a first responder for about 3 decades in the state of Connecticut across various communities. And I want to make sure that people understand the importance of having first responders within a very close proximity to where you are. This is not something that we can look at as a concern that you deal with in the moment. As a paramedic for 28 years in Connecticut, I can tell you from firsthand experience the importance of being within a minute or two of an emergency. Something that happened January 31st, 2007, that I was a part of. This was something that was mentioned as part of my campaign in 2024. This was an incident that happened here in the town of Willimantic, January 31st, 2007. There was a structure fire. This was a fatal structure fire that occurred on Oxbow Drive in Willimantic. And what happened when I was on scene there was that a volunteer firefighter responded to the scene from South Wyndham, was aboard a fire engine. He was the driver. He was going to be the pump operator. He stepped off of the fire truck out of the driver's seat, collapsed to the ground with a cardiac event, and immediately was unresponsive, was recognized by some of his fellow volunteers. I was on scene because of the structure fire, and because of us being immediately there with the equipment that was necessary, this firefighter who went into cardiac arrest was defibrillated and successfully resuscitated in less than a minute And that only comes from having the not only proper tools available, but also the properly trained individuals being there immediately to be able to recognize the emergency and be able to respond. Fortunately, this firefighter lived for years beyond what happened. He was successfully resuscitated. He had the interventions necessary at a cardiovascular center to correct the problems that had caused this event. That is not always the case. When something happens and 911 is called, you are hoping that people are there as quickly as possible. In the case of a true emergency like this, the best success rates are when that type of intervention is available within the first minute or two of an emergency happening. Now, think about the proximity that you have to be within with the proper equipment, the proper training, and somebody able to respond to be to that emergency within 1 or 2 minutes. Now, it's true that what really causes brain damage can take several minutes to occur, but the more timely manner that you can respond and recognize and correct these life-threatening emergencies is what is going to make the difference in a positive outcome. And when you have a fire department, such as Yantic, where they are asked to sign a contract, we talked about this on Monday, that this contract that was asked to be signed by the chief as a incorporated organization with bylaws that dictate what their policies are, this might not have been something that was under the authorization of that particular chief. Because he was not able to sign this in a timely manner, that volunteer fire station was shuttered, it was closed. The emergency response equipment was repossessed by the town. And that section of Norwich is now potentially outside of that window of response where there could be a significant change in the outcome in the case of an emergency, as I just explained to you. This is something that we need to recognize, that our local governments, their primary responsibility is to the safety of our communities. And when this type of thing interferes, and we have now circumstances where a response time is delayed, that's unacceptable. I explained on Monday also that we have a real problem in Connecticut where there has been a substantial decline in the number of first responders available because our numbers of volunteer first responders in Connecticut have dropped from a number of around 22,000 in 2017 to the most recent estimates of about 8,337 volunteer firefighters and EMTs as of May of 2025. When you look at almost 63% decline in the people who are responding to emergencies in these communities, especially in Eastern Connecticut, where we predominantly rely on volunteer response to be there within a short amount of time. Many of you who've listened to the show know that for more than 2 decades, I was a paramedic that responded out of Windham Hospital, and my response area was 16 surrounding communities. When you look at the very northern end being Willington, Ashford, parts of Eastford, from edges of Brooklyn all the way down to Franklin, Lebanon, Andover, you're looking at a driving time that could be from one end of that district to another of 30 to 40 minutes. You cannot rely on regional EMS response to adequately protect our communities when response times are that lengthy. Now, that is not always the response time. The majority of the call volume was within a response time that was less than that, but that is the potential. And it's showing how thinly spread we are with our coverage for first responders. And this is something that we need to look at moving forward into the future. We also need to recognize that this is something we need to address immediately because the decline that we've seen in the past 9 years is not something that is going to be sustainable. And this is something that many other states are facing. But I want to make sure that people who are listening are understanding how important this is, problems ahead of time, and not simply wait until there are concerns that have occurred that we need to now and try and correct. One of the things that I think that the Yantic Fire Department has as an advantage here in their, I want to say, control of what is happening with this kind of unified command structure that's going on is that the contract that they were being asked to sign really didn't fall under some of the very basic concepts of legal contract binding agreements. And it's this idea that there wasn't the full mutuality of assent with this, where both parties were allowed to contribute and come to a mutually agreed upon contract that both the City of Norwich and the Yantic Fire Department could agree upon and thereby resolve some of these situations. I think that this does afford an opportunity for the Yantic Fire Department to be able to uphold their bylaws and say this is something that we need to make sure that the entire 58-member, I believe it's 58-member volunteer department has a voice in. And therefore, I think they do have some legal grounds to slow this process and make sure that it is both mutually agreeable to the Yantic Fire Department, to the taxpayers of the Yantic District of Norwich, and also to the Norwich Fire Department, which is legitimately trying to establish a unified command structure of placing the volunteers underneath the district chief of the fire department, which does oversee all of the other budgetary restrictions that the fire department does have to be involved in. So I wanted to make sure that listeners, if they're interested, have the opportunity to participate in this process and be involved in, if they are interested in hearing what's going on, like I said, on February 28th from 10 a.m. to 12 p.m., 137 Norwich Avenue in Taffville. There will be a protest that is open to the public to allow you to not only listen but also participate in this process of how we're moving forward in looking at the relationship between volunteer fire departments and the municipal fire departments that are providing our public safety. Some of the other things that we're going to discuss today, and one of the things that I presented for Mike DeSonia's show Monday, Unfiltered, on WILI, was an auditor's report. And this is from the internal control over financial reporting and compliance and other matters based on an audit of financial statements from the state of Connecticut. And this really addressed 5 significant issues that have come to light through this independent auditor's report. And I want to provide our listeners with a little bit of background on this as we're getting started in our conversation. States, if you go back to, I believe it was 2013, that the federal government contacted states and said we need to have some sort of a agreed upon standard for performing audits and for looking at governmental accounting standards across the board. Prior to 2013, Connecticut had something that was called Core Connecticut that it used for auditing of its internal controls for the state government. 2013 instituted what was generally understood by the federal government as the Government Accounting Standard Board's guideline, and Connecticut did adopt a form of that under something that was known as GAAP, GAAP, which is the generally accepted accounting practices that are now in place for auditors as they look at what is happening with taxpayer money that is being used throughout the state legislature and being appropriated by the state for disbursement through both state agencies, state departments, also non-governmental organizations and nonprofits that are funded by the state. This report came out June 30th of 2024, but really caught attention at the beginning of 2025 because one of the big and glaring issues that was recognized here, and there was really 5 of them that I'm going to quickly cover with you, but some of the most important ones were very, very glaring causations as to why we're seeing poor performance in audits that are performed on our state agencies. So these findings are all going to be dated 2024. They're dated 1 through 5. And the first one looks at the Office of the State Comptroller specifically, and it identifies inadequate financial reporting processes and journal entry errors. And the condition of this audit finding basically said that several funds contained material errors that required multiple corrective journal entries by the auditors of the state of Connecticut. And these were very, very substantial findings. One of them was a recognition that the OSC, the Office of the State Comptroller, excluded the budget reserve fund from the beginning balances of the state budget. This resulted in an erroneous $3.1 billion journal entry that was required to reconcile the fund balance. I have concerns when there is such an egregious error that is recognized here. And the causation for this is something that's cited on the next page of this report. And it says that the Office of the State Comptroller lacked a sufficient internal review process to identify and correct these material errors, and that these misstatements were the result of inexperienced accounting staff, insufficient written procedures, and ineffective supervisory review. That shows me fundamental errors from bottom to top where we as taxpayers should expect better from our state government. We'll move on to, I'll talk for a moment on finding number 2. And this has to do with the generally accepted accounting practices that I mentioned just a minute ago. This said that under the GAAP forms that the state of Connecticut is using to identify these acceptable accounting practices, that there was inadequate reporting through a number of different departments. And these go from the Department of Social Services, Department of Transportation, Department of Housing, Department of Developmental Services, Department of Administrative Services, Department of Revenue Services. Over and over again, they're finding that there was inadequate financial reporting processes through these GAAP forms that are meant to identify accountability errors in a timely manner so that we are not now seeing these adjustments being made by auditors at the end of a fiscal year and a fiscal process where there is very little accountability, very little transparency, and very little oversight overall. I'm going to move on to, I'm going to take a step over to, this is 2024 finding number 4, and this is inadequate financial reporting processes by Connecticut state colleges and universities. And we know that a huge amount of state appropriated funds go to higher education. This is one of the identified effects of the lack, I will say, of inadequate financial reporting process. Without a controller, and this was recognized because there was not someone in the role at the Connecticut State University and State Community College system of overseeing this. So there was an open position in this. What the effect was that without a controller, inexperienced fiscal staff made numerous material errors that required audit adjustments and delayed the completion of fiscal year 2024 financial statement audits for the Connecticut State University and Connecticut State Community College system. This late completion of financial statements and audits contributed to the delays that the state was able to perform these audits in a timely manner. We need to have transparency where we see where this money is going and where it is happening in a timely fashion so that there can be some true transparency and accountability. And this goes right to finding number 5, which again deals with lack of timely audit reports, this time with a state department that is the State Education Resource Center. To understand this specifically, Connecticut general statutes require that the State Education Resource Center, which is a quasi-public agency and a component unit of the State of Connecticut Department of Education, they're required to submit annual reports that include the complete set of financial statements to the governor and to the auditor of public accounts. This is found under Section 10-357D of the Connecticut General Statutes, and it requires that these annually submitted financial audits from the State Board of Education are submitted. Well, it turns out that this audit report in finding 2024-005, the SERC, the State Education Resource Center, did not issue fiscal year 2022 audited financial statements until February 18th of 2025. They were 3 years behind. And as of March 26, 2025, the SERC had not submitted any of its audited financial statements for the fiscal years of 2023 or 2024. The effect of this was that without timely audited financial statements, it is absolutely impossible to assess the financial performance of the State Education Resource Center, and without proper administrative and financial controls, there is an increased risk of fraud. This is what I've talked about multiple times on this show, that we cannot have this type of lack of accountability and transparency in our state government. This is not acceptable. Whenever you have this, this is clearly an indication that we need to look further into this, because there are not the financial framework and audit guidelines that allow us as taxpayers to see this independently and with transparency. We are coming to the top of the hour. We are within a minute or two of the bottom of the hour, and we I want to bring up one thing, and I'm going to mention this again at the end of the hour too. I want to make sure that in the second session, as I'm talking about some of the legislative issues that are going on right now in this legislative session, that my listeners have the ability that if they feel that one of these topics is something that they want to provide testimony on to the state of Connecticut legislature, that they know how to do this. Many of you know that in January to June of 2025, I worked for the Appropriations Committee at the state capitol, and I want to take you through the process, because it is not exactly easy for you to find out how it is to provide either in-person testimony or written testimony to the Connecticut General Assembly. Where you want to start is you go to ConnecticutGeneralAssembly.com, CGA.com. When you open up that page, you're going to see a scrolling picture of pictures of the state capitol in different formats. Right below that, on this home page, you're going to see a box that says CGA Daily Record for, and then the current date. Right below that, you will see bullet items, and the second one is bulletin, and it'll have the current date in parentheses next to it. When you click on bulletin, it's going to bring you to the Capitol Bulletin, and it's going to have not only a picture of the Capitol, but it's also going to list each of the committees. And as you scroll through that page, you will find hyperlinks, meaning that they are underlined and highlighted in blue, that will bring you to the appropriate pages for providing not only in-person, Zoom, or phone testimony, but you also have the option to provide written testimony. This is extremely important. If you hear of legislature that you do not agree with, it is imperative that you go online and provide anything in the form of testimony to oppose these, or in support of, if you are in support of the testimony. This is stuff that the state legislators will look at. This is stuff that the committees will look at, and they will take into consideration when they are debating bills and the language of bills. But you have to participate. When I was there in the Appropriations Committee, when I looked at the people that were showing up to provide testimony, they were very passionate about the state supporting their cause. And that's something that I think in Connecticut, conservatives' perspective is very lacking in. We do not have a good format for getting our constituents involved and participating in this process. So that's why I wanted to make sure that this was something that I provided for you. We are at the bottom of the hour. This has been Right Now on 95.3 FM, 1400 AM. We'll be back in a couple minutes for the second segment of our show. Welcome back to Right Now. I am Chris Reddy here on 95.3 FM, 1400 AM, WILI. Normally, I would have a co-host at least with me in studio. We've had Mike DeSonier here as one of our co-hosts, Curtis Ayler as another one of our co-hosts, and I do want to provide a special shout-out to Curtis, who was not able to be here today. It is his anniversary. I wish a happy anniversary to Curtis and Caitlin, and I look forward to having you guys on the show next week. Let me again say thank you to Wyndham Industries, one of our sponsors, building strong foundations for tomorrow. If anyone would like to call in and provide some content to our show this afternoon, 860-456-1400 to contact WILI. You can also listen to any of these previous episodes of Right Now or Mike DeSonier's show on Mondays, Unfiltered, 3 to 4 p.m. Make sure you check him out as programming at the opposite end of the week from me. But you can go to WILI.com, go to podcasts, scroll all the way down. You'll see both Right Now and Unfiltered with Mike DeSoniers, and you can listen to any of our previous episodes there. You can also view us on YouTube as we record in studio every single week. You can see those available online streaming. We left off talking about the Connecticut General Assembly and how you can provide testimony for bills that you find are ones that you either want to oppose or support. I want to say that as someone who spends a lot of time every single week looking at the bills that are being proposed, reading testimony, listening to what people have to say about the legislation that is being brought forward in Hartford, it is extremely overwhelming for me. And this is what I do. I can't imagine being a regular person with full-time job, probably plus one job, family, other commitments, being able to keep track of all of this. That's what I'm going to try and provide over the next couple of episodes of Right Now, is a little bit of context with some of the legislature that is coming out of Hartford right now during the session. I want to take you back first to the November special session last year that I spent several episodes talking about. And one of the major bills that was raised at that point and approved through this emergency session was a housing bill. Some of the aspects of the housing bill that were not approved and voted on are now being brought up in this legislative session. And I've mentioned over the past couple of episodes of Right Now that the purpose of this legislative session is to make budgetary adjustments that need to be debated and discussed at the Capitol following last year's legislative session. This is really to kind of make up for things that were voted on in 2025 before we get to the next odd year legislative session where, again, we talk about all concepts and all bills. This one is really supposed to be geared towards those budgetary changes that are necessary for appropriations at the state government level. The Housing Committee has brought up raised bill number 151, which I want to discuss in some depth today on the second segment of our show here. And what I see as happening here is that the aspects of the housing bill that were brought up in the 2024 legislative session, the 2025 legislative session, the 2025 emergency session, the components of that were not voted on and approved to be part of that housing bill that eventually passed in November are now being brought up as part of this legislative cycle. And some of them are being raised as a portion of the Housing Committee in Bill number 151. I have a printout of General Assembly's Bill 151 here right in front of me, and I want to talk about some of the important components of this that are going to affect not only us as Connecticut taxpayers, but also affect the idea that has been a component of Connecticut policy for decades, and that's the idea of home rule. We are a state where we have local control. The reason that we vote in town councils, town selectmen, planning and zoning, board of educations, is the recognition that locally we know what is best for our communities. We don't need a top-down, one-size-fits-all mandate from the state to tell us how to develop our communities. This is why every odd year we have municipal elections, and a significant portion of those elections are identifying and promoting people in our communities to planning and zoning that have the best interests locally of how our towns should develop. I see raised bill number 151 as being a direct assault on that home rule. I'm going to go through in the next few minutes and talk step by step about some of the important points of this raised bill and why we need to oppose this. I'm going to start off by reading what's known as the Statement of Purpose. And what it says specifically from the Connecticut General Assembly is that the statement of purpose of this raised bill 151 is to prohibit local jurisdictions from 1, adopting and enforcing certain zoning provisions relating to lot size, dimensions, setback requirements, lot coverage, and design or architectural elements for certain single-family houses. Number 2 is that it prohibits local jurisdictions from prescribing certain housing types in certain zones. And number 3, it prohibits local jurisdictions from prescribing certain subdivisions of certain lot types. Now let me take you through this and describe what some of these prohibitions are looking to prevent. Right? One of the most significant ones that was brought up both in 2025's legislative session, in the emergency legislative session, is the requirement of a minimum number of off-street vehicle parking for motor vehicles in residential developments. I think that this is a absolute public safety issue, and coming from someone who spent a long time responding in emergency vehicles and seeing the requirements of our streets that were really not designed for parking traffic on both sides of the street and allowing two vehicles, especially a fire engine or an ambulance, to safely navigate these roads. To now say that in our urban and suburban areas of Connecticut, we no longer need to accommodate off-street parking for residential units up to, I believe the number was 16 units. Where is all of that on-street parking going to take place that does not affect responses in public safety? One of the other things that this does is that raised bill number 151 will say that zoning regulations adopted and pursuant to this section shall not require that there's a minimum, not only dwelling unit minimum floor area size, but also that there is a change in the setback from property lines. This is concerning in several issues. First off, with the setback, when you are stacking properties on top of each other, especially with something else that happened in 2024 that I'm going to mention in just 1 minute, they're saying that the standard setback zoning regulation, which can be determined by a individual municipality, now has to conform to what the state of Connecticut is mandating. And they're saying that the minimum building setbacks for a home or accessory structures is now going to be 10 feet for front and rear setbacks and 5 feet for side setbacks. Now, just stretch out your arms and imagine what a 5-foot setback is for a dwelling or accessory structure on a property to the town line, and how in some of our communities, this could literally be stacking houses and accessory structures on properties on top of each other. And now if you're asking what some of these accessory structures could be, an example of one of these accessory structures is something that is discussed specifically in Raised Bill 151. One of the things that I did mention in a previous episode when we talked about affordable housing and homelessness in Connecticut, and this is something that is actually in this raised bill, is a portion that says that in the case of what's being defined by the state of Connecticut as a temporary health care structure, and I want to make sure that I clearly define what this is for you. According to the state of Connecticut, a temporary health care structure is a small, transportable, prefabricated residential unit that's about 300 to 500 square feet that is designed to be brought in and placed on a caregiver's property. So if you are a legal guardian, a family, a custodian, specifically the wording in Raised Bill 151 is that if someone is mentally or physically impaired, this custodial guardian or family member can have a temporary structure dropped on their property without proper electrical or water or sewer hookup so that someone who requires, and this is again physician authorized, requires care, that a family member can now in a residential area have a temporary, not on a foundation. The way that I see this is a prefab home or a Connex box that's been converted over to residential occupancy in that 300 to 500 square foot range can be placed onto a property so that a family member can supervise the care of someone with either mental or physical impairments that require them to have assistance for daily living activities. But this goes past local zoning laws for safety when it comes to discharge of waste, wastewater, how these temporary structures are going to be properly maintained, how any waste from these is going to be properly contained or removed. There's a lot of questions about this that I feel are not being properly addressed in Raised Bill 151. I'm for people being able to help their family members. Why it is necessary to place them in a temporary structure on your property and how that is beneficial to improving the affordability in the housing market in Connecticut, I think is a little bit beyond the scope of this bill. I think this is something that's being put in there to try and take some of the relief off of other state agencies. And what I mean by saying that is that I'll take this back and say that there was a very significant study that was done years ago in the state of Connecticut that showed that there was a really significant recognition in the percentage of the population who might need this type of housing and the rate of mental illness that is apparent here. What I'm saying is that if you were living in a community, in a neighborhood, I'm going to say, and suddenly a house, a temporary housing structure is being put into your neighbor's property for someone that has significant enough mental illness that they are not compliant with medications, they are not able to function on their own, do we want to be able to try and help that person live independently? Yes. Do we want this being done by a temporary structure that does not have the proper hookups to municipal infrastructure being placed on this property? I don't know if that's necessarily the answer, and I think that this is a Band-Aid being placed onto a bigger problem that we have in Connecticut. I don't think this is necessarily the best solution that we can come up with. There are other aspects to this housing bill that are of great concern, and I mentioned one of them a few minutes ago, and this comes directly to things that I can attest to from past experience. One of the things very early on that I remember as being very impactful as a paramedic and seeing houses where these type of building code standards were not being strictly enforced. One of the things that happened in 2024 was that the state of Connecticut recommended to the state building inspectors and the Code and Standards Commission was to amend building codes to allow for a single egress in residential properties that are multifamilies. They can be up to 4 to 5 stories high with 4 units per floor. And if you think about being in an emergency on the 5th floor of a multifamily or apartment complex and only having one egress, even with the building standards that have changed, even with the best sprinkler systems, even with insulation and materials that are rated to an hour, I have a lot of concern with putting people into structures where there is only one opportunity for escape. This is something that was recommended by the state of Connecticut specifically to help increase housing density. And now when you're looking at combining a decrease in safety measures for people being able to escape a structure in the case of an emergency, and then allowing for very small lots, in one of the zoning regulations that was changed with this Raise Bill 151 that they're trying to institute, is that they want to make lot sizes at a minimum of 5,000 square feet, something where you can place multifamily units with that very minimal setback of 10 feet, 5 feet. When you're stacking these properties on top of each other, you have some of the conditions that we've seen in the past few weeks around Connecticut with very strong wind conditions, very high fire and burn conditions for the material that is around our homes in the woods, and you're setting yourself up for absolute disaster. If we do not, again, create public safety as priority number one here over things like housing density and trying to lower construction costs for developers that recognize Connecticut is not a market for affordable housing construction, we are cutting corners at the expense and safety, public safety of Connecticut taxpayers, and that's not acceptable. One thing that I will say is that I will trust developers when they say that in Connecticut we have a building environment that is not affordable for them. When you look at developers that have no local, like I'll say they are not somebody who has the best interests of our community in mind. They are looking for their development business to be profitable. And when they look at Connecticut, they see a number of reasons why developing Connecticut is not profitable. And much of that is from a legislative perspective. We have created an environment where this housing market is one where developers do not want to come in and put in the workforce and working class income housing that we need. Coming out of COVID, we are showing the fourth worst economic growth in the country. There are numbers that say that we are 100,000 units below our necessary number for affordable housing. But I'm saying that the affordable housing is there. What we've done is created a climate in Connecticut where nothing is affordable. We have driven the cost of everything from housing to property taxes to insurance to the cost of living to the cost of groceries, all the cost of insurance. It has all become so high and so inflated that we're pushing that working class demographic out of the state. The houses are there. The affordability is not, and legislating it is not going to make this change. One of the things I started to say just a minute ago is that developers recognized it. Developers see that including affordable housing in part of their plans in Connecticut is not a viable option in this housing construction market. That's where we need to look at making the changes, not by asking the developers what it is that's holding you back, because they're going to say all these things. They're going to say, hey, look, I can't build here because I have to put a second egress into any multifamily property that I build. There isn't room on some of these lots. I don't have the room for parking for 12 units off street. The developers are saying these are the things that are preventing them from investing in Connecticut. By simply bypassing these, we're not creating the correct growth environment for housing. We need to make this a place that is not only affordable for working families, we need to make it an environment where businesses want to come here that are going to bring employment opportunities in. And that all starts from creating the environment where we are not absolutely being drowned in mandates from the state of Connecticut. I mentioned this on Monday during Mike's show. 1,250 mandates pushed down from the state legislature on our communities, not only through education mandates, but municipal mandates. We need to do something that is going to decrease that and make this an appealing environment financially for families to come and relocate to Connecticut. Until we do that, things are not going to change. And we are, with the current legislation going through, not heading in that direction. We're coming up to the top of the hour here. Thank you very much for listening in to Right Now on 95.3 FM. As always, you can listen to us on WILI.com. You can go to YouTube and see any of our previous episodes. Again, I want to say, if you are interested in providing any testimony to the Connecticut General Assembly on any of these issues that we talk about on Right Now, please go to cga.gov. You're going to go to Bulletins, which is right at the top of the page, and you can scroll down through all the different committees, select the committee paragraph that describes the legislation that you want to provide testimony for, and you will see the opportunity to either select in person at the Capitol spoken testimony. You can also provide Zoom testimony. You can provide testimony over the phone. You can also provide written testimony. Please make it an effort that if you oppose any of this type of legislation that we talk about here on Right Now, that you do reach out to the CGA. You let them know that you are in favor or opposition of any of this. This is very important to our legislators to see what the perspective of the Connecticut voters are. Thank you very much for listening again to Right Now here on WILI 95.3 FM. I'll talk to you next Thursday.